the power and importance of second order thinking, to go beyond the obvious, to some extent predict the future. You know, every society on the planet, every human society, has a word that venerates the people who can see into the future and predict it. So in primitive societies, we had seers and we had sages and we had people who could read the runes and read the stars, read animal entrails. In the modern world, we have stockbrokers and we have business analysts and we have consultants. To some extent, they're all trying to make sense of what's going on today and all of the data that are available in order to be able to make intelligent predictions or forecasts about what's coming in the immediate future. And this can be incredibly valuable because, of course, if you know what to expect, then you also know in advance how to respond to it. And you can create a playbook that allows you to do exactly that. It's basically what a business strategy is. It's basically what a budget is. But as a wise person once said, plans never survive first contact with the enemy, because it is almost impossible to truly predict the future. And how many opinion polls and things have we seen in the last few years that have proved exactly that? So what's the point in doing this if it's almost impossible, if it's an exercise in futility? Well, because the benefit of a plan is not the plan itself, it's the planning process. It's thinking about all of these variables, which then allows you to respond in the moment because you've thought about all of those variables, so you know roughly where something's coming from, even if it is in itself unexpected. And the greater your depth of thinking, particularly about second order consequences, the greater the accuracy of your plan, and also the better able you are to respond in the moment, because you're more likely to spot things that would otherwise blindside you. So what do we mean by this? Well, I suppose this is the law of negative unintended consequences, Black Swan events. And if you haven't come across that phrase, it's actually a phrase that became the title of a terrific book, The Black Swan by Nicholas Taleb, which is quite a challenging read, but it's really powerful in what it's talking about, which is this this tendency for us all to think about things as though they're within a normal distribution, and that certain events are more or less likely than others. So if you work on the available data and only on the available data, then if there is an outlier, if there's something outside of that data set, then it will blindside you always. So it was assumed in Europe that all swans were white, until one day an Australian swan came along and, oh, actually there's such a thing as a black swan. So new data completely throws out everything that you had previously thought to be true. And the three main signifiers of a black swan event is that, number one, it was unpredictable in advance. Number two, it looks completely inevitable in hindsight. And number three, it has a significant or even catastrophic impact. So, for example, the terrible events of the 11th of September 2001. Unpredictable in advance. In hindsight, they look completely inevitable, because you can then trace back all of the variables that were missed, and you say, well, actually, why did we miss them? Because now we can see the trail. It looks completely inevitable. And the impact, obviously, was far-reaching and, dare I say, even catastrophic. So that's a black swan event. But the law of negative unintended consequences is one that, I suppose, to some extent, if you are in business, is a useful one to be aware of, because it is possible to challenge your own thinking so that you spot more of these kinds of variables in advance. And Sometimes it's called the Cobra Effect. Economists call it the Cobra Effect because of a, well, very well told story, one that's actually been around the block so many times that it's got kind of hackneyed and you might even be aware of it. It's a story about the local authorities in Delhi who were worried about the infestation of cobras in the streets of Delhi and the impact that was having. So they started to offer a bounty for dead cobras to be brought to the authorities. And this was hugely successful. They started to collect a lot of dead cobras. They started to pay out this bounty. And little by little, the cobra population in the streets of Delhi was significantly reduced. A bit of a win. But to the great consternation and confusion of the said local authorities, they noticed that the bounty that they were paying out didn't reduce, even though the cobra population in the streets had quite clearly gone down. So they looked at this and they just shrugged their shoulders and thought this was rather weird, but nonetheless, since the cobra population had now reduced to very manageable proportions, and in fact it was no longer an issue at all, they decided there was no justification for the bounty to continue to be paid, so they stopped paying it. At which point the cobra population exploded, and it got to almost epidemic proportions. It came back with a vengeance. It was worse than it had ever been before. And what transpired is that by offering this bounty, the local authorities had created a market for dead cobras. And when the number of wild dead cobras in the street started to reduce to the point where it was very difficult for citizens to capture them, certain enterprising citizens thought, well, supply and demand, I need to create some supply. So they started domestic cobra farms. They started to grow cobras in captivity. And this was really quite a booming business because, of course, it's a lot easier to kill a cobra if you don't even have to catch it. So they started to bring more cobras and get the bounty, whilst the cobra population in the streets continued to reduce. And of course, what happened when they stopped paying the bounty is that the cobras in captivity no longer had a value. That being the case, what did they do? They simply released them. Cobra population exploded overnight. And this is the sort of second and third order thinking that is really helpful. And applying several different lenses to anything that you're thinking about or planning. So looking at something not just practically and not just in straightforward economic terms about optimizing outcomes, because that's the way that economists think. It's not the way that human beings think. Human beings tend to think sideways. They tend to think round corners. They tend to think laterally, and they tend to think emotionally. So trying to look through the lens of the way that human beings actually behave and think and feel, rather than simply looking at things on a spreadsheet, is always a very, very good idea. So, when it comes to strategic planning, when it comes to problem solving, always think beyond the obvious.